Okay, namaste. First of all, let me clarify that the title is Pain and Suffering by Dr. Alok Pandey. Doesn't mean that I am responsible for anybody's pain and suffering. Okay, so it's about pain and suffering in general. Now, you see, there is nothing in this creation which doesn't serve a purpose. That's one part. But the mistake we make is that we believe that whatever has a purpose once has a purpose forever. So, this tendency for never and forever is something which we have to learn, that there is only one place where we can speak of forever. Otherwise, we tend to turn every event, every activity, circumstance, situation into a must always and always. So, pain and suffering comes at a point of time, it has its purpose and utility. And when we understand its utility and purpose, we can transcend it and we don't need it anymore. So, before we go into the purpose of pain and suffering, we need to note that pain and suffering occurs at least three levels of our being. First, we are all aware of it's the physical level. So, at the physical level, pain is an obvious reminder of Vivek. Vivek, screen. I want. So, pain is a reminder that, we are inadequate, we are imperfect, we are limited beings. It's a reminder of what is harmful for us. So, it tends to help us in a way to take the action which is necessary or the course which is necessary. So, not having pain at a certain stage of evolution can be very harmful and counterproductive. So, pain and suffering come at a stage of evolution. There is a point where there is hardly any pain. There is sensibility but not pain. This starts with life. For instance, trees and plants do experience at some level some kind of a pain, but it's more as a kind of sensation. It's pain nevertheless, but it's something which we don't often take into account because having a very anthropocentric point of view, we only think about ourselves. For instance, when we speak of pain and suffering, we never really think about the pain we cause to animal world in the course of our, shall I say, diet, appetite, or whatever. We don't think even of the pain we cause to plant life. And some people wonder that, so should we stop eating plants? No, there is a way to even pluck vegetables. The mother recounts how she would see and feel that there are vegetables which are ready to be plucked. It's like fruits. When they are ripe, they are ready to fall. That's the time to eat them. So there is a whole science that things are growing, developing, let them grow and develop. So when you do things prematurely, then it tends to hurt. Same way with a tree, there are instances where trees have felt the pain of the axe, and a mother has actually recounted it that the tree came to her all the way, that they are trying to, even the thought of people that they are trying to put an axe on me, and the tree came to know and it felt it and came to the mother, the spirit of the tree, not the tree, physical tree itself. So, what we need to understand is that there are many levels at which pain is experienced. The outer being of the tree is insensible, of course. Sri Aurobindo describes very beautifully in Savitri how when Satyavan is axing the tree, he feels a pain in his arm and he wonders whether the tree feels a similar pain when he used to chop it. So outward pain is one part of it, but there is deep within something which ultimately takes all this pain and absorbs it. So trees feel pain, plants feel pain, earth feels pain. Very often, mountains, when there are landslides in the mountains or rivers are in spades, because we have hurt Mother Earth and she tries to readjust the balance in her own way. It's like when there are wounds, we slough it off. So one thing we must understand is that pain and suffering is not unique to human. I think this is very important to understand, because very often, as I said, if I take only anthropocentric view, then the whole approach is very different. That, well, we are the ones, we have to get rid of pain for ourselves. But we must be careful that in trying to get rid of pain for ourselves, we are not inflicting pain upon this earth, upon creation as a whole. So this is one part. Second, pain is experienced at least at three distinct levels. So one is at the very physical level, and that we all are conversant with. And to the physical level, and physically, there are nerve fibers which pick up pain. It's very interesting to note. So the same sensation, the same vibration, the same impact, uh, is pleasant or painful, depending on the intensity and depending on the way we perceive it. Let's take an example. When two hands hit each other, even with great force, we don't call it pain. It's a joy. It's an expression of joy. If somebody you don't like expresses you the same movement, but like this, even a very gentle thing, it's like there is a tendency to shrink. So there is the perception of pain. The same experience, when done lightly and when done with great force, lightly it probably creates no sensation, and with greater impact it causes pain. So basically, the pain fibers in a way limit us, and they are there to define our limits vis-a-vis the world. So there is the world existence, and there we are, and we are actually one continuum. It's a very fascinating world to explore. Mother speaks about it at great length in the agenda. And just like in physics, we have the wave particle, way of looking at life. So we also can look at ourselves as a wave or a particle. Now, when we look at ourselves as a particle, then we have a very brief existence. We are clashing with everything else. We can look ourselves as a wave in one continuum with everything else. And this is what we will speak about as we proceed. That how, when we look at ourselves as a wave, then basically, in fact, in a way, pain vanishes, because we start living in the ocean wideness. But still, at a certain stage, it's needed. Pain is needed. And if there is no pain when life is developing, it can be harmed by many things. So that's why pain comes at a point in our evolutionary journey. But to this physical pain, there is another dimension of pain which can augment it. So this dimension is the psychological dimension, and we all know that almost all pains increase, one, when we are alone, and second, when we are at night. So night and aloneness, of course, often go together. So almost all pains, you check with any hospital, pains will increase at night. Why? Because ordinarily our mind is projecting itself outwardly through the senses. So there are many kinds of sensation flooding inside us, and the pain sensation is almost minuscule. It's annulled, or at least mitigated, reduced, because of many sensations which are coming crowding into our brain. It's like a huge traffic going on. But at night, when all other sensations are beginning to cease, the same pain sensation is impacting us much greater. And when we are alone, then all the more, because everything is turning upon that part of pain. So the second thing we learn about pain is that pain is a kind of concentration on a spot. This gives us a clue, which we'll talk about later when we talk about ways to get rid of pain. When we are intensely concentrated on an object or on something which is regarded as noxious, we tend to experience pain. So this is, pain points us where is the problem. So this is one way that pain helps us to show us where is the limitation, where is the knot which is causing pain. So it's a point where the whole consciousness gets concentrated, and therefore there is pain. So the offshoot of this is that basically one of the treatment modalities is to widen. We'll talk about psychologically, it's very easy to understand, but even physically we can widen. So as a psychological level, pain is, what the mind does is, mind can amplify a pain. Mind can completely diminish the pain. Take for example, if somebody hits you from behind, and what does the mind say? Oh, there is not a very pleasant contact, and you are annoyed. When you turn back and see, is your friend. So what does pain change into? It changes into deep pleasure. You tend to embrace somebody who had caused you pain, because in ignorance we felt it's an unknown person. So pain also comes because of unfamiliarity, inability to assimilate a lot of contacts which come from outside. To me, Karela may give pain. There are people who find pain if they eat rasgullas. I don't know why, but they do. They say, "Bahut meetha hai, too sweet." So there is this element of the mind which can amplify pain. So this gives us another clue. If the mind concentrates on the pain, in fact on any illness or problem, it tends to make it appear much greater than what it is. Whereas if the mind can turn away from an illness or a pain or a problem, then automatically the thing comes to its right size. There it's not, doesn't vanish, but it is brought to the right perspective. So this is what is called as looking at the larger picture and looking at the smaller picture. Because when we look at the larger picture, then we see that this is a small thing. Otherwise, one of the remedies, in fact, psychologically, when we experience pain or suffering more appropriately, is widen and imagine, contemplate the boundlessness of space and contemplate the endlessness of time. So when we do that, we realize that this is a one moment. Any year, 2 year is nothing but one moment in the entirety of creation. And when we look at, the Indian way of thought, something very amazing. This idea of rebirth has been very less explored. Its potential to change our life. Now, it's not about past life regression. I'm not talking about that. And it's not even about belief and non-belief. But this idea that life is a continuum. It's a very small little existence. Once one of the ladies, very well connected, to the ashram, French lady, she told me something very interesting. One thing I have noticed, that Indians are very little afraid of death. So I said, may or may not be true, but why do you say so? She said, it's because of the idea of rebirth. So death is a new beginning. So just look at it. We have never explored this idea to its fullest because modern mind has lost it. So what I have not completed now, also because we have changed rebirth into another kind of pain. Oh, your karma. So all the time man is haunted by his karmas. That there is somebody out there who is busy recording as if he had no better job than to all the time like a voyeurist note what you are doing and what you are not doing. Thankfully, there is no such creature. No such being. God is not a voyeurist because he is Sarvasakshi. He doesn't need to peep into our rooms and see what's happening around. He is not only the eternal Sakshi witness, but he also is the one who is actually the impeller ultimately of everything. So there is no such person doing it. Rebirth is a mechanism of constant growth. In the flow of life, we are constantly growing from life to life. So it's so wonderful. People are so afraid of death, not realizing that death is an opportunity to relive our life. Of course, that doesn't mean that we say, oh, in this life I lost an opportunity, let me die and come back again. It doesn't work like that, okay? There are rules in the game. You can't say that, okay, let me try out another life. So the rule is that live your life to the fullest, put your effort to the ultimate. It may not bring any result. Doesn't matter. Put in your effort. So what happens when we put in effort? People often say, oh, what a failure. No. It's recorded, documented, docketed. That's where the fellow comes in. The person who is noticed. What is he noticing? Not about good and bad, right and wrong. He says, bahut try kiya hai. This fellow has put in so much effort. So it is docketed, documented well there. It is deposited in God's own bank. GOB. So there it is all recorded, documented, everybody has an account. And when we come in another life, it's like given to us. Okay, you did a lot of effort, but you were not ready to receive. It's a different thing that when that is fulfilled, you may say, why did I ask all this? But that's how life is. So it is a constant learning through experience. But at that point of time, it gives us pain. So when we look at life in the very large perspective of a constant flow, and especially when we know the flow is evolutionary, going towards a certain direction, it's not just a meaningless, happening in our life, then it's not about getting comfort, but also getting direction in life. What I mean by that direction is that, okay, it's going in a certain direction. Let me take that direction. Maybe instead of 10 lives, I may cross that whole process within 10 months. And that's what yoga is about. Yoga is to compress the concentration in a concentrated way, the evolutionary journey which spans across lives through much pain and suffering. So this is the psychological aspect of pain, where the mind can amplify, the mind can minimize, we can play with the mind. Even mind can, through auto-suggestion, completely annul pain. This can actually happen. There are many instances. I can tell you one which I have seen myself. So there was a huge wheel lying outside the ashram playground with nails coming out of it. So suddenly as I was passing it, we have amongst us also one good Samaritan. She wanted to lift the whole chattan right now. Stone right now. So, because somebody will get hurt. So, I saw the wheel and I thought I must put it aside because, it may hurt somebody because it has nails on top of it. So, that moment I thought I'm Abhimanyu, which obviously I'm not. So, with all my strength, I lifted up and felt very happy that, oh, at least a few millimeters I can lift it. Wonderful. And sure enough, little bit more I lifted and then my hands gave way. and like a fool, my feet was right below the wheel because it was moving, so I just became unconscious. Many lessons I learned here. Pain also is because of unconsciousness. So I slipped my foot below the wheel and it fell on the foot. And that moment, the first thought that came to me is, okay, this is an opportunity to practice samatha in the physical. So I am standing like this and I am actually seeing the foot getting swollen. Actually swollen. It was very interesting. And I actually experienced a joy that, oh, I am discovering something. How it is actually getting swollen. Completely disconnected. And this, because of the mind going into that kind of state, right up to cycling myself back to my home, it was fine. But the moment I went there, everybody, Hurry, what happened? What happened? Now, when I started recounting the story, I started noticing the pain is coming. And then all that, tanda pani, garam pani, and all that, crepe bandage. And so basically, the mind is it can completely cut pain. It has that power. But why can't we do it? Because we have never explored. So it's very unfortunate that in our entire education, though we talk about psychology, we never actually teach children or train children that there are possibilities within us which we have ourselves not explored. Plenty of them, not one. But in regard to pain, that you can completely detach yourself. You can actually anesthetize the spot. So there are instances where Raman Maharishi could actually come out of the body and surgery was going on and he needed no anesthesia. In the ashram context, we had Amal Kiran who actually came out of the body and actually saw that how the surgery is taking place in the eye, out of the body. With Sri Aurobindo, when he had the fracture of the leg, he is lying down and there is no oof, nothing. For almost 2 hours, mother came instantly, then everybody came, but there was no treatment. He was just lying like that because they didn't know how much to move, what to move, and by the time people came to move him, and then Niruddha asked him that, what were you experiencing that time? So they asked him that, are you having pain? He said, oh, one can be above pain. So what are you doing about it? Because there was no pain, no kind of either an expression or anything that don't move it like this is hurting. So they asked, what were you doing? He said, I was trying to convert pain vibrations into ananda. Meaning thereby that even there is a possibility wherein the same response, the same event can be changed into an ananda. It's completely opposite. So this is important psychologically because pain is not always because of physical reasons. Very often there are psychological causes of pain. And exactly the same event, same circumstances. Let's say somebody has hurt you. Always there are people who hurt us. Actually, it's people who don't hurt us. We hurt ourselves. But normally, habitually we react. So what happens? Habitually we react, oh, such a bad person, because of him I got hurt. So what has happened when I have done this? I have lost my autonomy. Because now it is somebody else who has hurt me. How am I going to change that person? So people try to change that person. It doesn't work. Nobody in this world has ever changed because of somebody else saying him. They change when they feel from within the urge for change. So what is important is to awaken this urge if one can. And the only way one can awaken is this urge for changes if one has changed within. There is no other way. And then the means, methods, etc. come. But supposing somebody hurts, we can give a very different response. And the response can be, one, I forgive you, but forgive you is also, you have hurt me, no, but I am a benevolent creature, I forgive you. Too much of like a kind of vanity in that. Or I can say, I pity you. You can only give pain to others. So that's the second part. Third is, we can smile and say, I refuse to be hurt. Try what you may. Now that is mastery. Fourth, I love you because through it you have shown me the door to the beloved. There is a very beautiful play of the mother which is about, she speaks about the future. And, when two people who are in love with each other, and then the lady discovers that the man has someone else, he's seeing someone else. So she doesn't react the usual way, angry. And people talk about angry young man, but angry young woman is like Radra Rupni Durga. So she doesn't do any of those things. She sees this man, and then she pauses for a moment on the threshold, and then she tells them that, look, I understand both of you love each other, but let your love be a little more better, more beautiful, more human, lifted upwards. Don't let it degrade into anything like animal. Then they wonder that what's she trying to communicate? What about her? She says, as for myself, I have learned that only the divine can fulfill this thirst. So I had my experience and I am going towards where I should be. So every event, even the most disastrous, seemingly disastrous, one is on the deathbed and one can look at it as the end, one can look at it as a new beginning. So there is a whole approach, and I wish, all of you are young entrepreneurs of the spirit, and you are doing so much which is so wonderful to the cause of Indian psychology. It will be very nice if somehow this can come into the curriculum of children. By curriculum, I don't mean a fixed textbook, but understanding that how, when we grow up, to the same event. Otherwise, one of the things that I find, so much misery, so much quarrel, but for what? Actually, for nothing, because we become so small points. We don't realize that my life is not centered around this. I can be free. And indeed, we have put ourselves in that situation. Often I give this example, another example of psychological pain, and there we see the two knots which cause psychological pain. So one is, a person goes to a psychological center where people are sick and sees a person constantly crying, Lulu, oh my Lulu, my Lulu, and he's in deep pain. So he asked the inspector asked the treating psychiatrist, why is he constantly calling Lulu and is so much of pain? So he says, he loved Lulu, but could never get married. So sad. Yes, I understand. It can be very painful. Few beds away, there is another person, Lulu, my Lulu. So he says, what's about this person? He says, he got married to the Lulu which he didn't get married. And now he is in deep depression. He says, well, that also I can understand. Then he goes still further, and there is another man saying, Lulu, Lulu, and he is depressed. So he asks, what happened to you? Did Lulu marry you, or she loved you and didn't marry you? Say, I don't even know who Lulu is. So why are you unhappy? Because these two people are crying for Lulu, and I believe she is somebody very desirable, which I have not even seen in my life. Hence, therefore, I am so sad and distressed that I never had an encounter with Lulu. Now, look at it. The story is about, most of the time, one of the reasons for pain and suffering, psychological suffering, is because we have been conditioned wrongly. As children, we have been taught, you get this, you'll be happy, you get that, you'll be happy. And it's something so unconsciously built. And we have, for everything, we have created, all kinds of mental images. So, लड़की होगी तो कुड़ी होगी तो सोनी होनी चाहिए, in Punjabi they say, oh, girl, she should be very fair, she should be this, that, and boy, oh, he must have cash. So for the boys, the qualification is only cash. He must have a lot of money, and if he is an NRI, very good. It doesn't work like that. We have started on the wrong footing. Marriage is all about love. Even if you don't marry, it's about love. If there is love, it creates beauty and joy. It doesn't matter. There was a beautiful movie, I forget the name. एक अकेला इस शहर में आबोदाना ढूंढता है. Long back. So the movie was about these two people when they love each other. And then, this lady gets married to an old man, and because, he will give all the property when he dies. So the two lover and beloved, they decide that, you get married, what's there is question of little more time. So everything will be in your hands, and then we will come together and we'll live together. But the beauty is that as she starts serving him, she falls in love with him because she realizes he's such a wonderful person. So you see, there is a breakup of paradigm. And she says, no, but I love him even when he dies, that I can't. Now, you see, we have been conditioned so badly that this only will give me happiness. So there, the love was hinging around ghar and all these things. And here it was love, basically love. So when we look at life, start looking at life afresh and anew. leaving behind all those conceptions. Unfortunately, lot of things our parents and teachers, sorry to say, transmit into us, which are like poison barbs. So, to disinherit that itself is a big thing. So, psychological pain has a lot to do with the way I understand life, the way I conceive life. Then, apart from psychological pain, there is another reason which normally we don't even understand, but it's called as occult. So, there are forces which are standing always behind to make us trip, to fall. And this is something which, of course, modern mind has lost this knowledge. But occult people who are into mysticism, spiritual life, they understand that there is something which is there are forces in this play of vast play of, call it the creator. So there are forces which help us advance towards higher realms, and there are forces which want to keep us tied down to the lower and trip us. So they like to stage a drama of life which is very painful, and they feed on our pain. So these are called in the parlance of yoga as adverse and hostile forces. So their typical way is that first they will make us, oops, I did it again, that kind of thing. Then they make us fill with guilt, then despair, then a feeling of unfitness, hopelessness, and eventually through that they take us into a hole. What is that hole? Oh, I am useless, I am a wasted person. And then we love to, there are all the songs of Mukesh. Well, he sings very well, that apart, but all the sad songs in the world, as if every song he has sung is for me, applies to me. This has not happened to you. But this is called going into a hole. So what is that hole? That hole is the hole of a very small tamasic ego. At its extreme, it goes on to say that, I am the creature who is meant to suffer. God created suffering. God created this world to inflict suffering on me. There are philosophies like that, which go on to say that God created suffering so that we can remember Him. What a God, my God. Stay away from such God, who created misery so that we can remember Him. But there are philosophies like that, which is very sad that we believe in a God who inflicts suffering so that we can think of Him. My God must be a monstrous God. But this is how we begin to experience life. But there is another experience of life when we can come out of the hole. None of this is true. I am delight. I am that being. And that takes us to the next level of, pain, which is hardly recognized as pain, but nowadays I see it more and more. It is spiritual suffering. So spirituality is supposed to be the solution of many things. How can spirituality bring suffering? So spirituality can bring suffering because there is in us, in all this mixed stuff that we call ourselves, an element of the divine light, divine being, a seed, a portion of the divine. And its only task is to help us grow toward the light and the truth, and in fact, to free us from all suffering. Actually, that's its task. It's the Agni within us, which purifies, rectifies, gives us the right mold. But there are parts which don't listen. So, spiritual suffering can be best understood as the suffering of a mother when the child she knows is taken a route which is dangerous and dark, but she has tried to convince the child doesn't listen. She can't disconnect herself from the child, but she suffers silently. So it is the suffering of that kind that within us there is the psychic being, the individual soul which suffers and feels stifled because it wants to be born, wants to take lead in the human quest, but nobody is listening to it. So this is what is one cause for suffering, which often goes unrecognized, but it's typical science. Nowadays people use words like spiritual emergency. I think some of us may have heard about it. I have seen, I don't like to use a word like spiritual emergency, but nevertheless it conveys something, that there are people, youngsters, who want to take a course of life because they feel the existential angst of something being born, something which is seeking release. But either their own nature or the world circumstances around do not allow it. So they experience a deep pain, a kind of depression which they don't understand why is it so. It's not because of any external reason, but it's because they are not living the life they are meant to live. So, this deeper spiritual reason for pain is that we are not leading the life we are meant to lead, and therefore, pain becomes a means to remind us that the life we are leading is not what we are meant to lead. Turn into that. It's like a correcting GPS, and there this famous story of Narada that, he asked Sri Krishna, they are strolling together, Lord Vishnu and Narada, that, Narada says that, I am always in delight, but I have heard a lot about Maya. What is Maya? Will you please tell me? And Lord Vishnu says, I am a very practical person. I don't like to give lectures. For that, there are many fools on earth who will do it. But I am my way of actually teaching by practical experience. So Narada says, okay, teach me. He says, that I'll do later. But can you fetch me some water? I am thirsty. So Narada goes to take some water. And there he falls in love, gets married, has children. Now everything is forgotten about the thirst of the Lord. And then one day, after 12 years, suddenly children die. There is a bonfire or house is on fire. Everybody is suddenly dies. And at that moment, Narada says, why it has happened to me? Oh, cruel God, you are the cruelest creature on earth, snatching away from me everything that was beautiful in my life. And at that point of time, he hears that little voice inside. Narada, but I am thirsty. I'll tell you, I'll answer all your questions. Can you fetch me some water? You had gone to fetch me some water. So basically, many times, it's not that this is wrong or right, please. That's not the idea. But for somebody, one needs to go through certain experience. That like when children are, infants are given chocolates and toy cars. But they can't be playing with chocolates and toy cars all their life. So there comes a time when the toy car and the chocolate is snatched away by the same mother who gave it to them. When she sees that they are getting indulgently attached to it. So the secret of living life with delight, the secret of delight spiritually, very beautifully, in the Isha Upanishad we find 3-4 very beautiful hints about freeing oneself from pain. So the very first shloka is about that. Isha Vashyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita magridah kasya siddhanam. So it says all this, is for the habitation of the Lord. My God, it frees us from pain. Actually, just on this, if we meditate, this body is of the Lord. Just imagine, live with this thought. It's not really mine. Now, there is a Jnana Yoga method. I am not this, I am not this. So I tend to discard it. No, it's not saying that. It is saying it belongs to the Lord. Meaning thereby take care of it. Because it belongs to the Lord. But don't worry about it because it belongs to the Lord. Take care of it. It's something which the Lord has given to you. But it's His. So He will take care of it where you cannot. There is a personal limit. Anyways, it doesn't belong to you. So that kind of attachment. And it says about everything in life. Tena tyaktena bhunjita yat kinche jagatyam jagat. Everything, every particle of creation, everything that is moving, non-moving, be with everyone and everything. Be with love, be with beauty, be with kindness, be with peace, be with harmony. But only one little inner surgery, very delicate, subtle surgery we have to do. Tena tyaktena bhunjita. By renouncing, enjoy all. So what is to be renounced? Not the object, but the way we attach ourselves. This body is mine. How much we suffer. We don't see the suffering of countless bodies. So when we look at the suffering of countless body, what do we learn? You see, this is a very important lesson. People often say, why should I bother about other bodies? Yes, okay, we'll give them painkillers. It's the same problem. No, it's not the same problem. When we look at the suffering of every body, then we say the problem is with the body. What is the problem with the body? Is there any body which does not suffer? Body, I am saying physically body. Why does it suffer? Then we see that because matter, physical body is yet imperfect. Then we realize that it's not about karma and all these things. The body is imperfect. Now when the body is imperfect, whatever you may do, it will be prone to pain and suffering. So we have to find a way and means that this body may change. That's where Sri Aurobindo's yoga comes in, which obviously right now probably it's a different theme altogether. But if there's a question, we can speak about it. The body itself must transmute itself. Can it be transmuted? Yes, because the divine resides in the body. The body should be a worthy dwelling place of the divine. It is not. Why it is not? Because nature is progressively creating bodies, forms and after forms, which can hold a little more degree of consciousness. Till finally you have a body which can completely have the divine consciousness without breaking down, because it's a tremendous consciousness. It's like thousands of suns burning. So many experiments, like today we have solar panels, today we have this, that, all this, because over a period of time, how did the flight begin? Not even by, of course, somebody conceived of it, Da Vinci. We had the wheel. From the wheel, so many things came up. Why? Because there was a possibility of motion which can be facilitated. And today we have all this, development. So that initial step that nature takes step by step, and it is going to create a body which will eventually be freed from the necessity of pain and suffering. Because just like the psychological being, it will not have this idea of self and not self. What it will do right now, because it's built on this plan, what happens when a virus enters a transformed body? So it will say, "You're my self," meaning thereby, because this self in which the body has started living is the divine self. What is the quality of the divine? A virus enters, it gets transmitted. So it goes back to its original truth. Its crookedness is gone. So everything that enters within its zone tends to get transmuted. There was this imagination was conjured in one of the movies, The Bulletproof Monk. So essentially, it's about the very body has to evolve. Otherwise, because very often people ask that why even sages and seers and saints, they suffer. Well, they don't suffer inside psychologically. If one is really a seer and a saint, one doesn't suffer inside because one has learned to detach oneself. But the body still suffers because the body is imperfect. What about the mind and the heart? Well, they are also beings in the making. They suffer because they are also imperfect. Now, when we look at life like that, and when we see that this imperfection is not a finish line, we have not reached the ultimate stage of evolution, we are transiting from imperfection towards perfection, then the whole story becomes clear. Why is there pain? Not karma, but because pain is the hammer of the gods to break a dead resistance in the human heart. It is meant to show us that I am still a limited being. And this sense of limitation is not to make us slip into a hole and say, "Oh my God, life is limited." It is to awaken in us the urge to go beyond the limitation into the limitless vast. This is what it is meant to do. So when we are most imprisoned, we can, react in two ways. One is when we are imprisoned, we give up on everything. We give up on life. We give up hope. We give up faith. We say there is no God, and we suffer and die. But there is another where the prison becomes a trysting ground for meeting God. In the case of Sri Aurobindo and quite a few that time who were imprisoned, they suddenly had that kind of approach that though I am outwardly in prison, I can inwardly be free and grow into vastness. So then we realize that pain is not a punishment. Very often it's a blessing. It breaks our limits. It reminds us of the imperfection of life. But this reminder is only to awaken in us a fire. If, children who never have faced a challenge in life, because their parents thought that right from the time the child is born, we will tell the child that, look, I own so many crores of rupees. When the child is 4 years old, we'll buy an airplane for the child. And we'll say, this for you. What happens to such a child? He never really grows up. Even though he grows up in age, he remains very vulnerable and fragile. So what we call as difficult situations, circumstances, are challenges life gives us. We should, not that we should ask for it, but they are challenges given to us to grow. It is in Kurukshetra that the lesson of the Gita is given. So the spiritual way is to widen and make ourselves vast. First is that Ishavasyam idam sarvam. So nothing really belongs to me. This doesn't mean that I leave everything. Then I will leave what belongs to me. I am not leaving anything physically, but I am treating everything as if it is a gift of God, which means to treat human beings, from that comes that we should have mutual respect, mutual care, love, affection. Why? Because they are not mine. They are gifts of grace. What about if people don't understand it, or they, react in certain ways? Doesn't matter. It's the transaction is taking place between them and the divine. As far as I am concerned, I step out of the way. So this is the approach we can adopt in life. Ten takten bhunjita, and with that comes magrida kasya siddhanam. A lot of things come because of this sense of possessive clinging. That's why when we are confronted with death, we are so much afraid. As if this body is gone, I am gone. These are all forms of ignorance. At one place, Sri Aurobindo says, pain is the signature of ignorance. Why? Because I think this is my body. But there are others who can smile even when they are confronted with death. I think recently a movie is coming. By the way, I am not being paid for its advertisement, but I have heard about it, Sher Shah. Is that correct? So that is the movie you were saying about. So that is the movie about Vikram Batra. Now here is the man who is facing in the battle a prospect where he may die. And what does he say? He says, Ye dil mange more. How can you say that? He is not professing to be a spiritual man. So again, this idea of spirituality with the meditation, the moment you talk about spirituality, everybody says, how do I meditate, please? So that is where we have given a completely wrong turn to Indian psychology. Indian psychology is so positive. Arjuna is on the battlefield. He is not sitting in a hermitage where it is being given. Indian psychology is not about theoretical Vedanta. It's about Vedanta in real life. Why is Abhimanyu freed from the fear of death? Because he knows the soul doesn't die. That's why, he has the shaurya. He says, okay, fine, you'll pierce my body, but I prefer facing the challenge of life. That's why Abhimanyu is immortalized. So, Magridha Kasya Siddham. Why do I want to possess and keep it forever? It is there with me today, it'll go with tomorrow. But at the same time, this too is still a approach where one is detached. After detachment, what is the next step? We must discover the oneness. It's not just about me and my pain and my little hole in which I am there. This is the cosmic pain and suffering which somebody like Buddha experiences. So spiritual beings sometimes experience the pain of others. They experience the pain of creation. They don't talk about it because their consciousness becomes very wide. And then they search for the cosmic remedies. So two remedies with which we can stop. One remedy is the remedy of the Buddha, where we say that this is a field of pain and suffering. Yes, things are imperfect. Man is imperfect. Life is imperfect. And the remedy is to draw into some state of inner perfection. Buddha used the word permanent. Doesn't matter. Permanent, a perfect state is there within in which you can withdraw. And the other is, can that perfection be brought into this world and our mind, our heart, our life, our physical being can be made perfect? Because if there is the perfect one within me, surely if he is omnipotent and omniscient, he can make our life and body perfect. So that is the approach that Sri Aurobindo takes. The first premise is very clear. When we live in this world, being of the world, some pain and suffering will be there because it's a reminder of the limitation, it's a reminder of the imperfection of our life. And through these reminders, the spirit rises mightier. As Sri Aurobindo says, pain is the hand of nature sculpturing men to greatness, and inspired labor chisels with heavenly cruelty and unwilling mold. And then he says that though we fall and rise, the spirit rises mightier with each defeat. Its godlike wings grow wide with every fall. So every time we experience the sting of pain, we are being prepared for a greater climb. If we can just remember that there is no hopeless situation ever. And if today we find ourselves cast down in the state of utter despair, Mother reminds us with a little story. Every night it comes. So you see countless stars. They are so beautiful. And so she reminds us the state when there was this entire concentrated point of light and all around was darkness. So that power which divides this universe divided that point of light. So what happened? She says there was no state more precarious than that which was at the origin. It is a bursting forth of that one into countless scattered points of light. She says, but look what he did with it. He has woven a beautiful necklace of stars across the sky. So when we experience ourselves in a state of utter despair, most vulnerable, most helpless, that is the time we are very close to truth. Otherwise, we are living constantly with the idea, I am somebody. First my visiting card, then my bank balance. The day we discover that neither visiting card nor bank balance, nothing really matters, nothing can help me, that is the time when we are closest to the truth that there is still someone whose presence can change everything in life. Of course, if we can live life remembering that wonderful presence, which is not only in the distant stars, not only in some distance heavens, not only in, you know, far above, but that presence is within us. That presence is in bird and beast and stone, in everything, in every creature. And if we can discover that presence and live by that presence and discover that presence everywhere, then even the hand of somebody who strikes us will say, thank you, God, you chose this way to awaken me to a greater truth. As Sri Aurobindo says, O misfortune, blessed art thou, for thou hast shown me the face of my beloved. These are states of consciousness to which mystic ascends. There's another one where he says, if you love me, then strike me. If you strike me not, then it means that you lovest me not. This is not to tell God to strike us. But even when we receive a blow, we can see behind the blow that there was something which I had missed out, some imperfection. And this is the divine who has come to remind me of that. So we start from that little hole, that little idea of self preservation needed at a point of evolution. And we can evolve to a point where we are not only inward freely free, but even the body can taste delight and oneness and be freed completely from the sting of pain, because it's no more necessary. Pain like pleasure. One thing we must remember, if we pursue pleasure, pain will come. This is a very old scheme. We have signed the contract. If I seek happiness, so he has said, okay, put down signature, I'll give you happiness. We have signed, footnote. You seek happiness, you will get couple of pains free. It's suffering free. It's the law. Because why? Because pleasure can completely bind us to a very small state. So pain is liberative. So actually, this is a old scheme. Nothing to do with karma. In fact, in a way, good karma, that pain came and reminded us that, look, I am tied to pleasure. So pleasure and pain are disguises, both. If you seek pleasure, pain will follow. If I seek pleasure, pain will follow. If I seek to remain only virtuous, vice will be there behind, peeping with its eyes, waiting for its moment. But if we seek delight, then both pleasure and pain and indifference, they dive into absolute bliss. If I seek the supreme good, then good and evil enter into a state of perfect unity. If we seek the supreme love, then spontaneously this human play of love and hate will cease, because everywhere and everything will see that little love shining at its core. So I think we can pause here, because the internet is saying you are speaking too much. So allow for some questions if there are. So I'll stop here, and please feel free to, raise any questions, anything whatsoever.
Akanksha, you had a question.
Yeah, I had a question. Thank you, Alok. I think my question goes to the fact that the turn towards spirituality in early life, like I can relate it with my own experience, was with some answers to this existential angst and even a kind of a crisis of the spirit sort of an experience. What I did discover mostly that everybody is giving you an antidote to pain. Nobody is letting or giving us a way to go into the pain. Yeah. And there is a kind of a numbing to that pain and almost bypassing it. I uh, some of the pieces of ready-made spirituality, that we run away from that, and it sort of numbs us to life also, I feel, if we can't really experience the pain of our life. So I would like to, like, what do you, what is your, in your experience, your views of looking at this phenomena of like actually using spirituality as a bypass road, which.
Yeah, I get your point. It's a very interesting question. Yes, so some people do use spirituality as a bypass. So they want to, escape from life, its challenges, and Obviously, it is the word used is spirituality, but basically, it's a kind of going away from the zone of pain. But the real challenge lies is I won't use the word going into the pain, but of course, though it is true that if we go into the heart of anything and everything, we will discover divine. But it's not a good path to go through, you know. But what I would rather say that if you can be in a zone of pain, where pain you are vulnerable, let's put it like that, and yet you use every vulnerable point to conquer that little thing within us which makes us vulnerable, then that is the spirituality which conquers the world, not runs away from the world. So personally, I have preferred that path, and there's the path in the Gita, there's the path Sri Aurobindo says, but these are the two paths of spiritual life. I won't use the word that one is, higher or lesser, but there are beings who choose to withdraw from the world existence at the highest level. That's what goes towards nirvana, moksha, ultimately, that this world is full of pain, sorrow, suffering. So find a way to, escape. And then there is the second misconception associated with it, that to escape from creation, we have to escape from creatures, which is actually not true, because the bonding is inside. Even if I cut myself from anyone and everyone, still I am bound to myself. So escape from creatures is not synonymous with escape from creation, because I am also part of creation. But this is a path that people choose. When they choose this path, then it is not necessarily that they will become numb. There is the example of Buddha. Because when they enter into a higher zone, like with Buddha's life, what is known as the Maitri Amitabh, you discover the real cause. See, when we are here and we are suffering with pain and others are suffering with pain, it's true that we become sensitive to people's pain. It's true. But at the same, because we are experiencing it, but at the same time, we don't understand the real causes. So we are never really able to heal, because, then it's like pity, or, oh, I wish, or a kind of kindness at best. But when we ourselves have gone beyond the zone of pain, then we discover there is a compassion which is born, because we realize it's ignorance. As the Buddha said, that you are tied to your desires and you are in a state of ignorance, you don't know who you are, and therefore there is pain. So there is a much greater power to heal and help. So somebody like Buddha was not benumbed, though he chose the path of escape. He was completely aware of the world pain, but he knew its deeper causes. So he was not reacting and responding the way we humanly respond when we see somebody's pain. I mean, I understand that there is a phase when one can become benumbed, like when we practice equanimity, or, sometimes we are just busy into, I should be freed from the pain, and I can become insensitive, and it takes away also, the capacity for joy in life. But this is one path, that even those who withdraw at a point of time, they can look at the world from a very wide compassion. The second is the way of the Gita, that I am in the middle heart of pain, and yet I am in the hands of joy. There's a line in Savitri which I am reminded of when I see Krishna and Arjuna, a hand of joy in a heart of pain. So that's where we are in the midst of everything, but we are not deluded by appearances. The appearance is always changing, nor are we running away from them. We are going to the core of appearances and seeing that there is behind all of them smiling the one who is our soul beloved. And most importantly, a lot of pain, because, for instance, because of desire, pain comes. It's so easy to understand ignorance and desire, especially the knot of the ego. Now, all these knots break when the simplest way is that why are we desiring things? Because we believe it will give us joy. So if we can find a source of joy within, then desire tends to drop off. It's like we want love from people, but when we find love within, then we don't need love from others. Does it mean that we'll become unloving? No, on the contrary, we'll become very loving. Because, see, we don't need love from anybody, no, but we'll give that love. It will pour in intense waves upon the whole creation, but without really wanting, appropriating, the will to ye mera hai. So then actually we can act upon the world with a much greater, power and purity and truth. And at the same time, we experience the delight within that comes by the contact with the divine. His nature is delight. So once we start experiencing that delight, then actually we really don't need joy from anything. But we are with everything, because just as the divine is taking joy in the world, so are we taking joy in the world, wherever it takes us. To give an example at a very pragmatic level, ordinarily what happens when we travel? We want to be in places that we like. So we either prefer a nice hotel, Or if somebody is known, when we go to somebody known's place, we say, "Oh, so nice to meet you," etc., etc. Now, when somebody is turned to the divine and is living in that consciousness, so what happens? If he gets a nice hotel, he's fine there. So, but if he gets a small little place, he's equally enjoy there. If he's staying with somebody whom he knows, he's of course there is a joy. But equally, if he's staying with somebody for whatever reason who is totally unknown, still that joy can be there, because simply because he's actually dwelling in the divine. So it gives a tremendous empowerment and a vantage point to act in the world. So such a yogin actually pours himself upon the world with a much greater force and energy. But yes, there is a kind of spirituality which does teach us to bypass. I know this is we use these days of just witness yourself, separate yourself. If this separation is the first step, then it's okay, because we have to learn to separate from the play to change the play. But if this separation is only to withdraw from, some people like they take to sannyas, they give them deliberately pain. Now, obviously, that's not the path that God intended for man. Because if that was what he wanted, he wouldn't have created this creation with all its varieties and colors. He would have just made only snow-clad peaks and not given us the capacity to, have dresses. We would have just roamed like bird and beast and, sat on peaks and meditated. He doesn't intend that, that's for certain. So to flow with that divine intention in creation, but with the divine, not with the sense of the ego. Ego brings the limitation and the pain along with that. Yeah. And the ignorance that I am this limited being. Alok Pandey can be hurt subtly because it's a limited being. Anybody can hurt me by saying that what's your knowledge is worth nothing. Or somebody can say that all your lecture is trash. So if I am this being, I'll be hurt. But if I am not this being and I am living in that vastness, and I understand that everybody has a right to their own approaches. So somebody says you spoke like a stupid person, I'll say yes, sometimes God can make the stupid person say wise things, and he can make the wise appear stupid in front of everyone. And a lot of stupidity and wisdom has to do even with the receiver and the hearer, if I have to add a little bit of wit to it. So what I'm saying is that, it's a different consciousness altogether. But if I am this limited Alok Pandey, the speaker, then it's like, oh, okay, you told like this, next time I'll see you. So ego causes pain. And if there is a way to rend the knot of the ego, then there is delight. So there are two ways this knot of ego is cut in world. One, by contact with the world itself. There are plenty of people all around who will cut the knot of the ego. At least attack it like anything. So, Nindak niyare rakhiye bin nindak sab soon. The man who criticizes you is a blessing. Because he will keep showing you so when God loves somebody, destiny likes you, he will keep somebody near you, will keep on criticizing you. The whole world may praise you, but that person is intended to criticize you. Okay, so this is because knot of ego is being cut. That's all. It's the divine's plan. But there's another way to get this knot cut, because this is a long process. So many people cutting a little knot here, like sometimes, when there is a very complicated knot, then everybody says, let me try, and they keep on complicating it. So the world is like that, because it has been given the task of cutting the knot. Now imagine a scenario where everybody is cutting the knot of the nada of everybody else, not their own. So what a potpourri this is going to make. But the other way is, as Mother says, thy embrace, O Lord, that rends the living knot of pain. The embrace of the divine. So, even in the world, divine is hidden. But he comes to us as a wrestler. Ego will be crushed, no choice. Everybody is. It's not like somebody is crushing my ego, his ego is preserved. There are mechanisms in this world. Hiranyakashipu believes that he has conquered the three worlds. Even the gods are subordinate to him. But his son says, Dad, you're wrong, Original rebel. Dad, you know what? I love you, but I can't believe what you are saying. It's all trash. Your books are wrong, dated. Prahlad. You see? Nachiketa, his father, it says, Dad, you're doing something wrong. It's not right. This is not the way you are, giving away the cows, the half-dead cows to the gods. Where are you going to give me? So, in every house, he makes sure that there is somebody who will make sure that the ego will not survive. If God loves you, if we are still in nursery stage, then everybody will be flatterers around. Sir, you are very good, sir. You are wonderful, sir. Behind the back, they are saying he's the idiot. But in front they will tell you because they want things. Such if we are surrounded by flatterers, that means we are still in kindergarten. But if God loves us, at least there will be a couple of people who will keep pointing out. Whether they are right or wrong is not the issue. Neither the flatterers nor the criticizers, because nobody really knows. But the simpler way is, don't meet him as a wrestler, meet him as a lover and beloved. So there also ego goes away, but so joyously. So, thy embrace, O Lord, that rends the living knot of pain. Meet God the lover rather than God the wrestler. Meet him like Radha met and not like Kansa. That is the story. Okay? Yeah.
Sir, thoughts occurring as I'm listening to you. When you speak about the evolution of, the transmutation, etc., and when we speak of Buddhism, there was a withdrawal. But would you say it was an evolution to the Mahayana teachings where the Bodhisattva ideal came in, where the beings not only did the realization for themselves, but understanding grew in them for doing something for the existence, for all beings?
Yeah. Very beautiful question. So basically, as I look at it, like many of these great beings, Buddha's teachings were misunderstood even during his own time, to start with. And if you look at the context in which Buddha came, he is often known as Avedic, but he's part of the Vedic pantheon. Vedic larger Sanatan Dharma. So the reason is Buddha, like many others who came subsequently, he saw that people had just become lost in karmkand, external ritualistic approach to God, and they are missing on the essentials. He must have seen that people are doing puja of the God outside, but neglecting the that presence within. He has noticed that people had turned God and all these great experiences into limited dogmatic formulas. So, when Buddha came with his mighty intellect and tremendous vital power, he taught that the way is self-discipline, inner self-discipline. The way is dharma, dharmam sharnam gacchami. The way is surrender to the higher consciousness, buddham sharnam gacchami. And to come together as a group, sangham sharnam gacchami. The eightfold path, the way is self-discipline. The way is spiritual self-discipline, if I may say so, through which man's path of evolution lies, and not through a satisfaction of desire. Because desire will lead to suffering. It's so wonderful. Buddha didn't bother about metaphysics, because the big problem of metaphysics is, I feel very much with this, that when people engage in metaphysical discussion, they sometimes fix a limit and tend to develop dogmas. That's how we have this kind of this believer, that believer, because we have reduced God to a certain fixed formula, formula within the mind. So Buddha broke all that and liberated the truth within the forms. So in certain sense, and because he had seen that people have a tendency, he came when the Vedic religion or Vedic thought was on the decline. So he knew that once again, if I try to qualify, they will turn it into another formula. So Buddha refused to answer metaphysical questions. Whenever they would ask him, he would say that find out by yourself. And therefore many people called him Anatmavad, but it's not true. Because if he really believed in Anatmavad in that sense, then there is no question of liberation, because who is liberated and from whom? But he did speak about a permanent. So that way Buddha was a very powerful, one of the most powerful, personalities ever. His action still continues. So one can imagine that Buddha was far from withdrawal from life. As to Hina, but that's how it is understood. You see, when you see, like any religion, it's not only Buddhism, but every religion it happens, that we pick up a name and scripture and we forget the real spirit. The other aspect, Mahayana and Hinayan, that's very interesting, because, and of course, Theravada Buddhism, if you want to look at it as an offshoot. So basically, one took that aspect of Buddha, like the Ken Upanishad. Yan mansana manute yanahur manomatang tadeva brahman tam viddhi. So the Brahman is beyond Nedam yadidam upasate. So that took the approach of otherworldliness. This is the Hinyan, to put it in Upanishadic language. That look here, you can't find divine within these limited aspects which Buddha broke the forms, but it is beyond. So that approach the Hinayana took. So naturally, if you take that approach, then even the gods and all other celestial beings have to discard. That's how Hinayana becomes seen. It's the little vehicle. Northern Buddhism, or the Southern Buddhism. But Mahayana was very much like inspired by the Sanatana Dharma thought that everything is an habitation of the Lord. So it's like in Isha Upanishad that Isha Vasyam idam sarvam yat kincha jagatyam jagat. So that became Mahayana. And then subsequently the occult side, which was taken by, Tibetan Buddhism, Theravada and all that. In general, Mahayana, you will find that up north, if you go, you find Mahayana. Because, that's the place which was so much full of all this Vedantic and Upanishadic literature. Where you go down south, even till date, it's not only with Buddhism, everything. You take the Vedantic thought. If you go upper part, it is full. And as you start descending, you have that, Mayavad, you have that tendency to, reduce God into something beyond. And both are stages and steps. It's not like this is better or that one. There is a time when man must, to reduce the hard grip of material life, must understand this is a spiritual life which is far beyond. And surely Buddha must have seen, if we go into the history of any civilization, it goes through a time when it is completely entrenched and enmeshed in, complete materialistic thought. So a person like Buddha emerges and teaches that, look here, there is something which is beyond. Find that, hidden, qualify it, wonderful. But at the same time, after we have found, what happens then? Now that's when some people prefer to withdraw. Others choose to get back and say that, well, what I have found, it is there in creation. If it is within me, logically it is in everything. And I must discover it in everything and help everybody to discover it. This tendency that I must enter into creation, help all to discover it, and is in everybody, is the basis of love. That is the true birth of love. And that's why, Buddha's that aspect which Mahayana Buddhism has brought forward is, the idea of Amitabh or Maitreyi Buddha. So that's because Maitreyi, he is the one who loves mankind, which is the greater ideal that Buddhism posed. So the beauty of Buddha is he has given both. On one side, withdraw from life, then cut off desire, it will cause suffering. But Buddha also showed a higher ideal that having achieved nirvana, before he is going to enter into Mahanirvana, because these are the two states. Nirvana is while living in the world, and Mahanirvana when you cut off completely. He hesitates and looks back upon earth and says, no, how can I accept my liberation? The larger impulse that, the whole mankind is in a state of suffering and I refuse my liberation. That is obviously the higher and a vaster impulse. But maybe for each one at different stages, both have their meaning. So Buddha is not to be, no great being is to be discarded because each brought to the earth something beautiful. But what happens subsequently? They get lost into, I've been to Leh, Ladakh, so it's so beautiful. It's all full of, you see the Buddhism. But there's the first place I learned. So there are some places where those chakras are there, So you, like the same mala firna, you just put it across and you have done one mala. Now that's a human tendency because to put real effort is very difficult. That's why you need iconoclasts like Kabir, who will say, man ka fer. Tan ka man ka fer ke kya hoga? So, iconoclasm is born from that higher thought, but beyond iconoclasm is that another experience where we see the divine in everything. In Vivekananda broke many of these outer ritualistic tradition. He had a very strong Buddhist impulse in him because he also saw, even in the monasteries, this same thing happens. So both are needed, and in a perfect integration of the two, or understanding that they are two stages of one becoming. If we are completely indulgently involved in the world in an ignorant way, there is no way we will find the door to escape or find the divine or find that greater consciousness. But having found, it is too selfish if I want to withdraw away, because after all creation is the divine. And then to enter into it for redemption of the whole world, that is the ultimate sense of Buddha. Yeah.
Okay, Alok ji, thank you. Oh, there is one more question, sorry. Niharika?
I think I'll ask. It's similar to what Akanksha was asking. And I was curious if you could shed some light on collective suffering and I don't know how to frame this. So, in my experience, when I went through a dark night of the soul 10 years ago, it actually opened my heart to the compassion, to a sense of purpose, and a sense of wanting to serve the world as I went deeper into my own pain. So it kind of felt like the pain was like a sacred wound. Um, and so I guess my question is, you mentioned not recommending the path of going down pain. That if we go into the path of pain, you said something like, I don't recommend that. But in my experience, I've found that the sacred wound can often lead us to that purpose and the compassion that connects us with a collective suffering from which we can sort of feel more connected and responsible. Yeah. So
Yes, yeah, wonderful question. I mean, there was a very beautiful series on this, on the wounded healer. And I do believe that a perfect healer is somebody who has gone through pain. Because how will he heal the remedies which he has not faced? But having said that, what I mean is that we trip into this door of pain, stumble into this door of pain, and go through the dark hole, and eventually we develop compassion. Yes, but there are many who will slip into that dark door and don't come out. They won't have compassion, but they will get into a hole of despair. So it's something like, I'll tell you that you eat a food and it poisons you, and you discover that, look, this food is harmful, but you discover all the ways and means of eating it. But that's not the path we'll recommend to others. So when a healer goes through pain, and perhaps those who are destined to be healers often go through these deep wounds. Quite beautifully you have put the sacred wound. And they go through it, they come out of it, they are compassionate, they become humble. That's the other part that it brings, humility, compassion, and love for, because so many creatures are in that pain. But that is not the remedy that they would recommend. They would recommend a way where without entering into the hole, you can find them, because they've reached a point. Let me put it very simply, because it applies to spirituality very often. There are people who go through the pain, and at the end they discover the divine. I'm using shortcutting a whole journey. It's an experience which all of us have. I have had this experience. So, but when you discover the divine, you discover that actually I didn't have to go through this, because I was not heeding the call that I had to slip into this to discover it. So when I meet people, I am not going to recommend this way. Of course, if they are in this way, I would tell them that, look, at the end, it is the arms of your beloved that waits you. But you don't have to go through this process. So in traditional literature, we are told that there are two paths. Outwardly it is called Uttarayan and Dakshinayan. So they refer to the phases of the sun. Now, if you see in an year, the Dakshinayan starts sometime in June, and then it goes right up to December 21st, 22nd. So that's the phase when sun is gradually, night is increasing. What is there at the end of that night? There is spring. That's true. But there is a Uttarayan. After that, the day is increasing continuously till 21st June. So man can take both approaches. The healthier approach is not to go through the pain, but a healthier approach, which the mind of man also wants, that he doesn't want to go through pain instinctively, but to go from joy to greater joy. To be in the midst of joy and realize its inadequacy. That's what I mean. You are in the middle of everything that is giving you joy. Wife and husband and friends, or whatever, children and money and everything, but its limitations. And therefore you go from there to the next greatest step. Buddha himself took that step in a way. Personally, life, he didn't have pain. Same we see with Sri Aurobindo, Sri Krishna. So that's one path where we understand the limitations of what these things can give, and therefore we ascend from there to something greater. But there is another approach where we don't heed that. Then pain comes. It reminds us of the limitations after all. So when somebody comes in a state of pain, we do give hope. It's okay. Because one has explored the Dakshinayan also. One has explored that even in this path, at the end, there is the divine. So that's why when people are in pain, one of the highest words that the Gita has said, which has been unfortunately, misunderstood, taken out of context of the entire Gita. So it is anityam asukham lokam. This world is full of ever transient suffering world because it's constantly changing. So if I identify myself with the ever changing substance and cling to something, it will cause pain because by its nature it is going to change. It can't be the same, whether it be an object or it be a relationship. Anityam asukham lokam. Then he gives a remedy, bhajaswamam. Remember me at all times because I am the stable basis of this creation. So that is a intelligent way of doing it, that look, you see in life actually that everything is changing. Otherwise what happens, we jump from one changing pain to another thing which we think or believe that this is going to, ultimately I found, and again we get pain, then we go to another and again we discover the pain. So but that's one approach. I guess going into the heart of pain is also in a way to recognize this limitation of earthly life. Then we live in a state also of forgiveness, because we realize that people are limited. They are limited by the darkness that is within them, they are limited by the state of consciousness, and this does bring compassion. So both parts are okay, but the preferred is joy to still greater joy. That's what I mean, yes. But I guess healers have to go through it. Yeah. Sri Aurobindo speaks of it in Savitri, that he who would face the world must bear its pain. How will he know what is the malady? People who have never experienced pain in their life, when you go to them, they will, give you all kinds of advice that according to Vedanta, this is all illusion. That's what I think Akansha was referring to. So they will give all this kind of advice. But because they don't know what it means to be in pain. It's very easy to say, that there is this one being, this all intellectual. They've never really experienced the pain of going through that state. So when one has gone through it, it does chasten our mind. It brings humility. It doesn't make us adopt more than spiritual bypass, a spiritual vanity, a kind of spiritual pride. See, I am above all these things. Look at these creatures who are suffering in ignorance, which is of course very dangerous. Spiritual pride can lead to a serious downfall. But yes, it makes people like that. They start giving all this, Vedantic lecture. But it's not true Vedanta. True Vedanta teaches us compassion. It teaches us that the one is not only within me, but in everybody. And it automatically, if one follows that path really. But this is a kind of pseudo-Vedanta where people intellectually have got a truth but never really experienced pain. So they don't know. They don't know either the one, nor they know the pain that you experience in this, manyness. I can close this part with, an experience I had in one of the, not ashram, but a spiritual, organization. So somebody came and he was telling, I have renounced the world. And I said, Acha, so what happened? I don't take much interest in all this kind of external renunciation. But anyways, he started saying, I was married, I had 6 daughters, and then one day I came away. So I said, so you renounce the world, but your wife is doing the sadhana because she is doing yoga, bringing up 6 children all by herself. But this is how people understand. It's a crass insensitivity. That's not what Buddha will recommend. Buddha has gone away, seized by a cosmic urge. So he could leave behind his wife and child because he's like a scientist who is in search of the problem of cosmic suffering. But there are people who want to escape like this, that I'll go to a monastery, I'll go to a, ashram, or I'll go to a nice place, and now I don't have to worry about anything. What happens to those who are behind? Well, they are in ignorance. That is the kind of, that's the intellect which bypasses the real problem. So it goes into a zone where one is comfortable, but life will catch up because life is the same everywhere. Monastery or ashram, human beings are the same. So they will come and remind you, I am there. You can't escape me. Yeah. Okay. Namaste.
Okay. Alokji, can we take one more question?
Yes, please.
Sir, I just remembered. You mentioned about hostile forces which affect us psychologically. Would you speak a little more on that?
Yeah. Okay. So there are in the spiritual mystic lore all over the world, there is, one accepts that there are, man is not alone in this creation, nor only what we see today as bird and beast and stone. There are forces which stand behind, which help and hinder our progress upward. So there are forces which are benevolent forces. Even in human beings, we can see, people who are benevolent by nature, and there are people who want to create problems for you, and there are some who are harmful but come wearing the mask of the benevolent. Like, Duryodhana telling Karna that, come, I'll give you a kingdom. But by giving him the kingdom, they have taken away the dharma. So this is the way even in world we can see. But behind these, the mystics saw the play of vast cosmic forces, much greater, much more powerful than human beings. Those which are benevolent, which are helpful, which show us the way, help us ascend, are the gods. And those which create obstacles on the way are the adverse and the hostile forces. So they will keep on creating a problem. They love to create, at their lowest, they try to create mischief like accidents. Basically, what do? They pick up one corner of insincerity, one corner of unconsciousness, they push into that. One may be a spiritual person, and yet, one is walking on the road and one was unconscious in that moment, one tripped over. Of course, if one is truly in that higher consciousness, one will be protected and saved. But this is their work. Now, how do they act? Adverse forces pick up something within our nature and make it appear very huge. Let's say somebody has a problem of anger issue. They will keep pushing anger issue at the smallest, at the drop of a hat, and make you believe it's unsurmountable. Till you finally give up and say, well, I am anger prone, what can I do about it? Now that's what they want you to pin you down to a soil where you stop, refuse to move. Then, so they make us feel, we are guilty, we are unfit, all these things. But hostile forces are far more dangerous. It's like Rakshasa and the Asuras. Hostile forces can sometimes assume divine forms. Like, by divine forms, I don't mean actual divine forms, but they can come in the form of benevolent people, like the original mafia don, Godfather. That, they come as trying to, so lures, they will give spiritual lures, they may give other aggrandizing thought that you are a guru, you are a great being, you don't know who you are. And then the person may get into it, and though one may lead a whole life like that, but basically one has fallen from the path. So all these kind of, or they may throw up abnormal depressions, crying spells, confusion, chaos, disintegration all around. Their task is to disrupt, to disintegrate. By disrupting, to disintegrate. Because when things are together, there is a kind of joy, there is a kind of love blossoming. It's a beautiful soil for things to grow. But disruption, disintegration. So this is the task of the hostile forces. Fear. Fear is one of the characteristic way they enter into the human consciousness. Lust for power, greed for money. This is how they distract us and detract us from the path. So why are they allowed? Well, ultimately they end up making the realization more perfect. So that's why they are allowed, because, well, otherwise we are very happy in our small little achievement. I did a course and I felt very nice. So normally, we are very happy with that feel good factor. So they come and tell us, no, that's nice feeling will not do. You see, you are still vulnerable. So actually they are in their origin instrument of sincerity, but they have forgotten grace. So they make us believe that, there is no grace, life is all meaningless. Whenever we feel depression and despair, those fellows are nearby. So what we should tell them is, look here, let me tell you, divine is with me. Don't, that's enough. They are very scared of the divine name. Doesn't matter what you believe in. You may believe in Mother, Shri Krishna, Christ, it doesn't matter. Whatever name represents to you the divine, or simply Om, chant with all the heart, and you will see them running away with their tail between their legs. Because they know that our game is up. They're very afraid of, losing that. So the best way to tackle the hostile forces is just to call the divine name. Krishna, 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 He Krishna Govinda, Hare Murare, He Nath Narayan Vasudeva. Om Namo Bhagavate Shri Arvindaya. Om Anandamayi, Chaitanyamayi, Satyamayi Parme. Or very simply, Ma. Okay? In short.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Alokji, for such a wonderful and
Okay.
insightful session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.